Criterion and norm referenced evaluation. Criterion referenced evaluation. Criterion referenced evaluation assesses an individual's performance based on specific learning objectives or standards rather than comparing them to others. It focuses on determining whether a student has mastered a particular set of skills or knowledge. Key points include predetermined standards, predetermined criteria. Students are measured against clear, fixed criteria or learning goals. Pass or fail. The evaluation typically determines if the student meets or does not meet the expected standard rather than ranking them in relation to peers. Independent of others. Independent of others. A student's score is based solely on their performance relative to the set criteria, not how others perform. This method is commonly used in certifications, educational assessments, and professional license exam. Examples include driving test, language proficiency test, and end of unit exams aligned to curriculum standards. Definition of Criterion Reference Test. CRT, Criterion Reference Test, is an assessment designed to measure a student's performance against a set of specific learning objectives or standards, rather than comparing a student's score to the performance of others. As a norm-referenced test, CRTs assess whether the student has mastered a predefined set of skills or knowledge. According to Ivan, 1970 defines a criterion reference test, one consisting of items keyed to a set of behavior objectives. Groenland, 1985. Criterion reference test is a test designed to provide a measure of performance that is interpretable in terms of a clearly defined and delimited domain of learning task. CRTs focuses on assessing how well individuals meet particular criteria or learning standards rather than comparing their performance to that of others. Characteristics of Criterion Reference Test. Its main objective is to measure students' achievement of curriculum-based skills. The primary goal of CRT is to assess how well students have mastered specific skills or knowledge defined by the curriculum. Next, balanced representation of goals and objectives. CRTs are designed to reflect the important goals and objectives of the curriculum, ensuring that the test content aligns with what is intended to be taught. Evaluation of curriculum, instruction, and group interaction. CRTs can be used to assess not only individual student progress but also the effectiveness of the curriculum and instruction. It may also provide insights into how different groups of students interact with the material. Next, can be administered before and after instruction. CRTs can be given as pre-test to assess initial knowledge and as post-test to measure learning after instruction, helping teachers gauge student progress over time. Reported in various forms. Results are often reported as minimum score, the number of correct items, the percentage of correct items or derived score based on correct items and other relevant factors. These results are used to determine whether students have achieved the desired competencies or not. These characteristics make CRTs highly effective for determining whether students have met specific education standards or objectives. Uses of Criterion Reference Test. To discover the inadequacies in learners' learning and assess the weaker section. Criterion reference tests are used to evaluate students' performance based on a specific set of learning objectives or criteria, identify learning gaps. CRTs help in identifying specific areas where students may be struggling. This can assist educators in tailoring instruction for the weaker learners or those who needed additional support. Number 2, recognize mastery of concepts. By comparing performance against predefined objectives, CRTs help to identify which students have achieved mastery in certain topics or skills. Measure the attainment of objectives. These tests are used to determine the extent to which instructional goals have been met by students, allowing for evaluation of both individual progress and group trends. Next, assess conceptual understanding. CRTs measure how well a student has learned a specific concept or skill, making it clear what students know or need to work on in detail. Grade level placement. CRTs assist educators in making decisions about the appropriate placement of concepts in the curriculum at different grade levels, ensuring they align with students' learning capabilities. Task or goal analysis. CRTs can be used to analyze specific tasks or goals within the learning process to determine whether learners can perform these tasks according to set criteria. Performance objectives. CRTs can closely tied to perform objectives because they test whether specific objectives have been achieved by students, providing clear feedback on student proficiency relative to those objectives. Development and instructional design. CRT's result inform curriculum developers about the effectiveness of instructional method and the need for revision or enhancement of teaching materials to meet educational goals. Limitations of Criterion-Referenced test. Chase 1974 lists the following limitations. Does not show how good or poor the learner's level of ability is. CRTs are designed to assess whether a student meets specific objectives or standards but does not offer insight into the relative level of performance compared to others. This means that they don't provide a comprehensive evaluation of a learner's overall ability. Influenced by a teacher's interest or by biases. The creation and implementation of CRTs may be subjective. A teacher's personal preferences, priorities, or biases can affect how the test is designed, scored, or interpreted, which can compromise the objectivity of the assessment. Important for only a small fraction of educational achievements. CRTs typically focus on measuring specific predefined skills or knowledge areas. As a result, they may overlook broader, more complex educational achievements or competencies that are equally important but not covered by the test. These limitations highlights that while CRTs are useful for assessing specific objectives, they may not fully capture a student's overall abilities or learning progress. Norm-referenced evaluation. Norm-referenced evaluation is an assessment method where an individual's performance is compared to the performance of a group known as the norm group. The purpose of this approach is to rank individuals in relation to others, providing a relative measure of performance. Scores must such tests do not necessarily reflect an individual's mastery of content, but instead indicate their standing in comparison to peers. Norm-referenced evaluation is the traditional class-based assignment of numerals to the attribute being measured. It means that the measurement act relates to some norm, group, or a typical performance. It's an attempt to interpret the test result in terms of the performance of a certain group relative position. Examples of norm-referenced test include SAT, a standardized college admission test that ranks students based on the performance relative to a national sample. IQ test, measure cognitive abilities and assign score based on how individuals perform relative to others in their age group. Curved grading, in some classes, students' grades are distributed according to the class's overall performance rather than an absolute standard. In contrast, criterion-referenced evaluation focuses on whether an individual has achieved specific learning goals or criteria without comparing their result to a norm group. Definition of norm-referenced evaluation. Groundland 1976 stated that non-reference tests are designed to rank students in order to achievement from high to low, so that decisions based on relative achievements, example selection, grouping, grading, can be made with greater confidence. Bournemouth. It is designed to measure the growth in a student's attainment and to compare his level of attainment with the levels reached by other students and norm groups. Norm-referenced evaluations are concerned with how students perform in relation to others, rather than solely on whether they have mastered the material. Characteristics of norm-reference test. Purpose. The primary aim of a norm-reference test is to measure student achievement in curriculum-based skills and compare a student's performance to that of a large group, usually a representative sample of their peers, the norm group. Grade level specific. Particular grade level. Norm-reference tests are designed for particular grade level, meaning that the content and difficulty are aligned with what is expected of students at that grade level. Post-instruction administration. These tests are typically given after a period of instruction to assess what students have learned relative to the norm group. Class group formation. The result of norm-reference test can be used to form homogeneous similar ability or heterogeneous mixed ability class groups based on student performance. Classification of achievement. Students are classified based on their performance compared to the norm group as above average, average or below average. This helps in identifying where students stand in relation to their peers. Score reporting. Scores are often reported in the form of percentile ranks, indicating what percentage of students scored lower, or linear standard scores, which allow for comparison across students or groups. These characteristics reflect how norm-reference tests are typically used to provide a broad comparison of student performance rather than measuring whether specific learning objectives were achieved. Stages in the process of norm-referenced test. Designing stage. Define the purpose of the test, the skills or knowledge areas to be measured, and the target population. Test format selection. Choose the type of items, multiple choice, true or false, and the structure of the test. Blueprint development. Outline the content areas and the number of items that will be created for each area, ensuring the test represents the domain being assessed. Developing stage. Item creation. Develop individual test items, questions based on the blueprint. Then pilot testing. Conduct a small scale pilot testing to evaluate item clarity, difficulty and discrimination. Item analysis. Analyze item performance using statistical techniques. Example, item difficulty index, discrimination index to refine the test items. Conducting field test. Administration. Administer the test to a large representative sample of the target population. data collection. Collect test responses, ensuring the data represents the full spectrum of performance across the population. Developing the test norms. Data analysis. Use the field test data to compute various norms, example, percentile standard scores that describe how individual test scores compare to the larger population. Norm group selection. Ensure the norm group is representative of the population for which the test is intended. Writing test manual. Test purpose and instructions. Clearly describe the purpose of the test, how it should be administered, and the interpretation of test scores. Norms documentation. Include information on the norm group and explain how to interpret the norms. Reliability and validity. Report on the test reliability. Example, test, retest reliability and validity. Example, content, construct, criterion related validity. Each stage is critical to ensuring the accuracy, fairness and utility of the norm referenced test. Uses of norm referenced evaluation. Aptitude testing. It is widely used in aptitude tests to determine an individual's capability in comparison to others. It helps assess where an individual stands in terms of skill or abilities. Rank ordering of pupil. Norm referenced evaluations are effective for ranking pupil by comparing their scores. This helps in determining where each student stands relative to their peers. Identification of mastery. It helps identify pupils who have demonstrated a high level of mastery in certain subjects or skills relative to others in the group. Selection of best applicant. It is useful in competitive context such as selecting candidates for a program or job where only the top performing individuals are chosen. Effective comparison across programs. Norm reference testing enables effective comparisons across different programs, instructions or curricula, helping to evaluate which programs performs better relative to a standard group. By referencing a large population, norm reference evaluations can assess where individuals or groups stand, facilitating a range of decisions based on comparative performance. Limitations of norm referenced evaluation. Lack of congruence with what the test measures. Norm reference tests often prioritize ranking students rather than measuring specific competencies or mastery of content, leading to a mismatch between what is assessed and actual learning goals. Exclusion of items answered correctly by most pupils. Norm reference tests tend to exclude questions that most students answer correctly because they do not help differentiate between students. This limits the focus on foundational knowledge, emphasizing trickier or less understood content. Promotion of unhealthy competition. By ranking students against each other, NRE, non-reference evaluation encourages a competitive environment rather than collaboration, which can harm self-esteem and motivation, particularly for students who consistently score lower. Does not measure individual progress. Norm reference evaluation compares students to each other rather than measuring individual growth or progress over time, making it difficult to track a student's personal learning journey. Cultural and socio-economic bias. Norm reference tests often reflect the experiences and backgrounds of the majority or dominant culture, which can disadvantage students from minority groups or lower socioeconomic backgrounds, leading to inequitable outcome. Limited diagnostic use. These tests provide little insight into specific strength and weakness of a student. Overemphasize on standardization. The emphasis on standardized formats can limit creativity, critical thinking, and other skills that are not easily measured through such tests. Test anxiety. The competitive nature of norm-referenced test can include anxiety among students, especially those who feel they must perform well to maintain a high rank, potentially impairing their performance and learning experience. These limitations suggest that while norm reference evaluation are useful for comparisons, they may not fully support individual learning or development. Difference between criteria and norm referenced test. Purpose. Criterion-Referenced test. The goal is to determine whether each student has mastered specific skills or concepts. The test is designed to evaluate whether students meet predetermined learning objectives or criteria. For example, in a maths test, a student must show that they understand addition, subtraction, etc. according to the curriculum. Norm referenced test. The purpose is to rank students in relation to one another. These tests measure how much knowledge or skill a student has in a broad area compared to their peers. For example, in standardized tests like the SAT, students are ranked according to their performance relative to other test takers. Type of measurement. Criteria reference test focuses on specific skills or concept. Each skill is measured carefully to determine whether a student has mastered it. The goal is not to compare students but to see if a student has reached a specific level of knowledge. Measure broad skills. Measures broad skills or abilities across a wide range of topics. The focus is not on mastering specific skills but on evaluating overall achievement across a broad range of areas. NRT aims to spread out scores so that high, medium, or low achievers can be easily distinguished. Test structure. CRT. Each criterion referenced test. Each skill is typically tested with multiple items to ensure an accurate measure of student performance. The structure of the test is built to assess whether students have mastered each specific skills and reduce the likelihood of students guessing the correct answer. Norm reference test. Each skill is often tested by fewer items and the questions are chosen to spread out scores and highlight difference between high and low achievers. Score interpretation. Criteria reference test scores are compared to a fixed standard or criteria. A student's performance is evaluated based on how well they meet specific criteria, such as scoring 80% or higher to demonstrate proficiency. Everyone could theoretically achieve high score if all met the standard, NRT. Scores are interpreted relative to the performance of other students. A student's scores depend on how others have performed and they are ranked accordingly. Distribution of scores. CRT, Criteria Reference Test. The score distribution is based on mastery. Students have scored. Similarly, if many have mastered the tested material, the scores show whether specific objectives were met, but they don't necessarily spread out the score across the population. Norm reference test. The scores are intentionally spread across a bell curve. The purpose is to rank students from high to low achievers, meaning only a certain percentage will fall into highest and lowest categories, while most will be clustered in the middle. Next, knowledge of. Students know exactly what content to expect in test items. Students often know Exactly what content or skill will be tested because the purpose is to evaluate mastery of specific objectives. Students little or idea of what content to expect in test items. Teachers teach to test. Students have little knowledge of the specific test items as the test assess broad knowledge areas. This unpredictability is because NRTs aim to measure general abilities and create competition between test takers. So, in summary, criterion reference tests focus on determining whether students have mastered specific content, while norm reference tests are designed to rank students by comparing their performance to that of their peers.